Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of September of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Kursk direction where the Russians continue their counter-offensive operation. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. We have added significant number of territories under complete Russian control. According to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, during offensive actions over the past 2 days, the units of the group of forces north managed to liberate 10 settlements: the village of Apanasovka, the villages of Apanasovka, Byakhovo, Vishnevka, Viktorovka, Внезапная, Гордеевка, Krasnooktyabrskaya, Обухово, Snagost, and 10 October. So we have adjusted the map based on this report in Russian favor. As for the geolocations, we have additional progress on the ground that we can confirm by video. For example, in this video we can see the Russian soldiers that were moving from one building to another in the village of Oktyabr, Krasnooktyabrskaya, trying to check whether there are some Ukrainians who haven't managed to escape the encirclement. So this is something like the clearing operation. This video confirms complete control over the village by the name of Krasnooktyabrskaya. And in the final episode we can see abandoned Ukrainian vehicle. Now let's move a little bit further in the southern direction. We have another video from the area of the railways, and in this video we can see a group of Russian forces that were storming Ukrainian positions along the railways. The Russians were trying to cross this area, so the Ukrainians were located to the south of the railways, the Russians were located to the north of the railways, and we see significant number of Russian stormtroopers. There was a very heavy clashes, as you can see, and in the final episode of the video the Ukrainians were forced to send FPV drone to slow down the Russians. So this video confirms complete control over the Russians by the Russians over the territory that located to the north of the railways. So the rest of the territory to the south of the railways was adjusted in Russian favor just based on the Minister of Defense report. Now let's talk about the territory around the village of Lyubimovka. So this is the next chain of Ukrainian defense. This is the most important chain. Today we got report from different pro-Russian mappers that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, and currently, according to pro-Russian sources, everything that located to the left, to the west of this red line is already under complete Russian control. But during the day we continue receiving different geolocations, different videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions. Most likely this is right in front of you. We can see the process of how the Russians were preparing the territory before full-scale offensive. And right before we start making the video, we start receiving additional reports about additional Russian progress. According to information we have, this evening, right now, in the evening of the 12th of September, the Russians began assault operation in the village of Nikolaeva Darina. The Russians began full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to restore control over the village of Darina, and the Russians began offensive operation towards the village of Lyubimovka. Furthermore, the sources are saying that the Russians have two groups of offensive. First one entered the village of Lyubimovka, and the second one moved further in direction of Tolstoy Lug. So this is approximately the situation. So currently, if we summarize everything, the clashes are taking place for everything that located, let's say, inside of this red line. And if the Russians are able to take under control these territories and to force the Ukrainians to fall back, there are very high chances the Russians are able to encircle the Ukrainians who are currently located between Novoivanovka, Leonidovka, Alexandria, and in this forest, and between these fields and this forest. Furthermore, we have today reports, geolocations that confirm Russian control over Malaya Loknya, and something tells me that in the very near future the Russians may try to begin counter-offensive operation from this direction as well, with the purpose to move in direction of the Russian forces who are currently moving in direction of Lyubimovka. So if the Russians are able to, let's say, meet each other in this point, then this is going to be a cauldron for those Ukrainians who are currently located in the northern part. So once again, very heavy clashes are taking place. Obviously, this is just the disaster for the Ukrainians. First, when this operation just started, I thought that this might be something like attempt to ruin the Ukrainian plans to take under control Glushkova area, but now we see that this is real 100% full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area completely and to secure the Kursk region. Now let's talk about Glushkova area, because the Ukrainians probably had some plans to take under control the territory. The Ukrainians continue bombing and attacking the Russian pontooned bridges all over the river of Seym. We have significant number of episodes how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russian engineering machine that were trying to probably reinforce or improve their positions along the bridge. But as you can see, as a result of a number of FPV drone strikes, the Russian engineering equipment was destroyed. A little bit further in the eastern direction, we have another video how the Russian soldiers were trying to cross the river of Seym, and this is as we discussed in the previous updates, the Russians managed to build probably tons of pontoon bridges along the river, so they have no problems with logistics. But the problem is that the Russians still concentrate their forces with very massive forces. And for example, in this video, the Ukrainians, of course, they have significant number of drones that flying above the river of Seym, trying to calculate the number of Russian reinforcements and reserves that the Russians sent from one, let's say, a bank of the river to another. In this video, we can see another episode when significant number of Russian soldiers were heading probably to the south, but the Ukrainians managed to discover them, and the Ukrainians began bombing the Russian forces with the cluster rounds. The Russians most likely suffered significant losses, and so this is the situation. So there are very heavy clashes, and furthermore, we have additional reports that the Ukrainians conducted a number of attacks deep inside of the territory of Russian Glushkova region. We don't have a lot of videos, but we received some videos during the previous 24 hours. First, we got just a photo, and this photo we can see two Ukrainian vehicles that, according to the author of this video, were heading on the territory of Russian Federation. And later we got another video, and the video was really completely geolocated and correctly geolocated. In this video, we can see two Ukrainian vehicles, including tank with demining equipment, and the Ukrainians were trying to create the routes of attack, the attack path, let's say along this road through Ukrainian border and Russian border, but the Ukrainian tank got on the minefields and was destroyed. Anyway, we have adjusted this part of Glushkova area in contested area because we received some geolocations, but we don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to establish control over this territory or not. Maybe they were defeated, the tanks and vehicles were destroyed, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. So let's wait for additional updates, but obviously the Ukrainians are trying to attack the Russians from this side, having two purposes. First of all, the Ukrainians are trying to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to move further in the eastern direction. And the second, let's say, purpose of this attack is probably to take under control Glushkova. So let's wait for additional updates, and the most important, let's wait for upcoming night, because most likely the Ukrainians will try to make another wave of attack this upcoming night from the 12th of September on the 13th of September. And then everything is going to be clear to us what the Ukrainians are planning and how the Ukrainians are planning to stabilize the critical situation in the Sudzha direction. Now let's talk about the city of Sudzha itself. As you can see, we have a lot of icons from this territory as well. The Russians during the previous 24 hours were bombing this territory heavily. A lot of FABs. Just in this episode we can see 4 FABs arrived on the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the village of Kazachya Loknya. A little bit further in the southern direction we have 2 more icons how the Russians, as a result of FPV drone attacks, destroyed 2 personnel carriers of the armored forces of Ukraine. So we see that the Russians intensify their activity. Most likely all these episodes is just something like preparation before upcoming Russian counteroffensive operation. And now let's discuss the village of Ruskaya Konopelka. Today pro-Ukrainian sources, and this is very important, pro-Ukrainian sources reported that Ukrainians abandoned their positions completely. This territory was used to be colored in Ukrainian and still colored as an area under complete Ukrainian control. We are not going to change the map right now, but most likely the village was recaptured by the Russians. If you remember, just yesterday we were talking about this video, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainian soldiers were running away from the village of Ruskaya Konopelka. So as you can see, significant number of Ukrainian troopers were moving along the road through the fields, and the Russians sent FPV drones to attack the Ukrainians and to destroy this group of forces. And as a result of Russian FPV drone attack, significant number of Ukrainians in this direction left there forever. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. According to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and we have a lot of changes on the ground. And let's start from the southern flank of the Pokrovsk direction. Let's talk about Kurakhova area. According to information we have, the Russians established complete control over this salient. Telling the truth, I'm not sure that the Russians managed to take under control all these fields and so on, because most likely there are a lot of minefields, lots of traps that were left by the Ukrainians during the previous months or during the retreat process. But one thing for sure, Ukrainians abandoned their positions because they realized that there are very high risk of being encircled by the Russians if they continue keeping their positions in this artillery pocket. Once again, during the previous, even a week ago, all these fields, all these fortifications used to be under complete Ukraine control, but today we got report that Ukrainians abandoned their positions completely and moved to the village of Gostre. So this is the current situation. Let's wait for additional updates. Most likely very soon we will color this territory in Russian favor. Now let's talk about Novohrodivka artillery pocket. Today we got additional updates from different mappers. Neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian mappers confirmed that these fields also were recaptured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. I'll remind you that we've been receiving updates about the Ukrainians withdrawing their positions from this direction for the previous probably 2 weeks or something like this, and most likely the Ukrainians are about to finish the process and to establish the final defense belt along the cities and the villages by the name of Maximilianovka, Gostre, Alexandropol, Zaryana, Zhelane Druge, Zhelane Pershe, and then Girnik, then Tsukurne, and then we are going to the city of Selidova. So this is the next Ukraine defense belt where the Ukrainians are planning to slow down the Russians at least a little bit. But I'm not sure that Ukrainians are able to do this because the situation is very critical. You know that on this, from the other side, we continue receiving reports from Zelensky. For example, today Zelensky stated that Russians have launched counteroffensive actions in the Kursk region, and according to Zelensky, everything is going according to our Ukrainian plan. You know that Zelensky today was very, very mad. He was very crazy, very mad. And today he talked a lot about the Chinese-Brazil initiative for peace negotiation. And he was saying so many bad words about this initiative that was prepared by China and Brazil. So, you know, if I was a Chinese minister, I would be very upset by the words of Zelensky. Obviously, he's very angry. I have never seen him before so angry, and he was talking very bad words about China. You know that since the beginning probably of the time when I started being interested in political things, I haven't seen anybody who was talking like that about China. Despite whether China is your ally or your enemy, nobody talks like that with China and about Chinese initiative. So most likely there was a very, very bad solution made by Zelensky. Now let's move further and let's talk about the city of Ukrainsk, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. We have a lot of changes on the ground this morning. The pro-Ukrainian mappers adjusted their maps and they shown us additional progress of the armed force of Russian Federation. So according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians already control by the morning of the 12th of September, the Russians established control for over, let's say, 10-15% of the city of Ukrainsk. But as for the pro-Russian sources, currently the Russians control around 90% of the city. And according to pro-Russian sources, the Ukrainians control just the landfill and the coal mine. So this is the only territory that remains under Ukraine control, but most likely during the next 24-48 hours, the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from these directions towards the city of Tsukurne. We have just one geolocation from this area, very important and very interesting. We have already discussed this geolocation during the previous video. In this video, the Ukrainian volunteers were evacuating the civilians, and during this evacuation process, Ukrainian volunteers met face-to-face with a Russian soldier. With a Russian soldier with a gun, the Russian soldier silently come to this place, and he asked these Ukrainians who are fighting and who are supporting Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian soldiers, he asked them, what are you doing? And they told him that we are evacuating civilians. and the Russian soldier didn't do anything. He allowed them to evacuate, and he just asked them to move as far as possible and as fast as possible from this area because there are very heavy clashes. And you know, we have already discussed this video in the morning update, but later we got additional details about the situation in this area, and the sources, the Russian sources, published a lot of photos, a lot of videos of this volunteer. So we can see the first person video of the Ukrainian volunteer, and later we got additional updates, additional archived video of this volunteer, and this volunteer were saying a lot of bad words and shown a lot of bad videos about Russian soldiers who died during the special military operation. He shown the bodies of the Russians and were saying a lot of bad things about the Russians, and now he saw mercy from the Russian soldier, and this is very interesting and very, you know, that's just a very interesting case, you know, probably the case that changed the life of this volunteer forever. He will remember this event for the entire his life, and he will remember always the videos he was making about the Russian soldiers who died during the special military operation. As for Selidova, probably for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the city, we haven't received anything, no updates, and now we are moving to Novohrodivka, where very interesting updates are taking place. We have a lot of changes on the ground, as you can see, and some of them in Ukrainian favor, some of them are in the Russian favor. Let's talk about Marinovka, and today we got the video how the Russian FPV drone was attacking the Ukrainian positions. You know that first we colored Marinovka as contested area according to different mappers. Then we have colored the village of Marinovka in Russian favor due to the video how the Ukrainians were counter-attacking the tree lines to the west of the village. And now we have restored control over the village by the armored force of Ukraine because we got the video how the Russians were FPV droning. So this village most likely is under complete Ukrainian control. Yes, the Russians, as you can see, are trying to encircle the Ukrainians from the north, from the west, from the south, from the east, but there are still Ukrainian forces and there are still very heavy clashes for this territory. Now let's talk about Novohrodivka itself. We have adjusted the northern part of the city based on this video. The video was published by the 25th Air Mobile Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In this video we can see the edge Russian positions and how the Ukrainians using drone, this is robot drone with grenade that entered the Russian positions, and then there was a very heavy explosion. So very interesting case when the Ukrainians were using the ground drone to attack Russian fortifications. As for changes on the ground, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians improved their position significantly in the western direction and entered the village of Lysivka. And now let's talk about important updates that are coming from the territory between Grodovka, Novohrodivka, Zhuravka. As you can see, we have adjusted significant territories in Ukrainian favor. So most likely the village of Krasny Yar and Krutoy Yar are under complete Ukrainian control. We made adjustments of map in Ukrainian favor based on this video. In this video we can see Ukraine attempt to counterattack. In this video we can see few armored vehicles or personal carriers that were attacking the Russian positions. We see how the Ukrainians landed in the area and then personal carrier left this position. The Ukrainians tried to take their positions and the Russians began bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with FPV drones and with artillery. This video and this place was geolocated. This is exactly the territory where this moment happened. We haven't adjusted this part in Ukrainian favor because we have some doubts whether the Ukrainians managed to save control over the territory or not, but obviously to get these positions the Ukrainians were moving through the village of Mykolaievka, Krasny Yar, Krutoy Yar, and then the Ukrainians landed in this point. And let's discuss this in details because this is very interesting, and obviously this is the most important operation. This is the most important place of the Pokrovsk defense or offensive operation. To understand what is happening here, it's better to increase the numbers of updates since the 8th of August, because on the 8th of August we received the first video that was published by the Ukrainians. In this video we can see Ukrainian robot. This is Ukrainian robot drone that was moving back from the line of combat contact. At least the author of this video reported that along this road from Krasny Yar to the north was moving the Ukrainian drone. First we thought that maybe this is something like archived video, and we decided to wait for additional updates to change the map. Then we received another video from the village of Mykolaievka on the 10th of September. In this video we can see how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian positions Russians, a Ukrainian vehicle in this part of Mykolaiv. And based on this video, if you remember, we have adjusted this part of the village. Later we got additional report. Yesterday we got the video how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions with artillery. And based on this video, we have adjusted Mykolaiv under complete Russian control, and we have adjusted the northern part of Krasny Yar. And now, based on this video of Ukrainian offensive operation, we have colored the entire line, this entire sector under complete Ukrainian control. And now we have very serious doubts whether the Russians managed to establish control over the landfill of the Novohrodivka 3, over the coal mine and this landfill. We have some doubts because we still haven't received anything from this area, and this is very interesting. Now, let's summarize everything. We see that Ukrainians didn't count losses, didn't count resources to hold their positions in Marinovka. And most likely using this Marinovka, the Ukrainians are using Marinovka, using the landfill, this coal mine that's still under Ukrainian control, and using this breakthrough, the Ukrainians in the very near future may try to encircle the Russians in Novohrodivka. Of course, it sounds crazy, and of course, there are very low chances that Ukrainians are able to do this, but don't forget, the Ukrainians have redeployed back their forces. We already see that Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper between the Russian positions in Zhuravka, Orlovka, and Novohrodivka, and something interesting, something big might happen in the very near future, exactly on Novohrodivka direction. The Ukrainians may begin their full-scale counter-offensive operation that can lead to problems to the Russians, or maybe to disaster. So let's wait for additional updates, but obviously something big, something interesting is going to happen in this direction very soon. Now let's talk about Pokrovsk. The Russians destroyed the main logistic bridge completely. The Russians are working a lot on Ukrainian infrastructure, trying to destroy as many as possible roads, energy facilities, trying to make the city completely blind, completely deaf, completely collapsed, completely blackouted. So let's wait for additional updates, but this is obviously an episode of a real siege. Now let's move to New York Toretsk agglomeration. We haven't received anything, as you can see. There are very heavy clashes right now, but just nothing to talk about. And now we are moving to the Chasiv Yar direction, where we got a lot of very interesting updates that are coming from the village of Kalinovka. During the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the railways, along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and we have colored this territory in Russian favor. And this evening, right before we start making the video, we got another video from the 56th Motorized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine of how the Ukrainians were after withdrawing the Russians along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and how the Russian troopers were moving in the northern direction. This is a very important video because now we understand what the Russians are going to do and are planning to do. If you remember, during the previous 48 hours, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Grigorovka. So this territory was colored in Russian favor based on this report. And now we see additional Russian progress in the northern part of Kalinovka and along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. And now we see what the Russians are trying to do. Because if you take a look at the map deeper in details, we see that there is something like a real and complex network of trenches. Along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, there is a forest. There are two forests in this area, and a dense network of fortifications between them. So we see that the Russians are trying to encircle these Ukrainian positions and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So this is something like preparation before full-scale offensive operation in direction of Chasiv Yar. And if the Russians are able to defeat the Ukrainians in this dense network of fortifications and to force the Ukrainians to fall back in direction of the Chasiv Yar, then the Russians will be able to begin full-scale offensive operation in the same direction, trying to attack the city of Chasiv Yar from the north. So very interesting and very complex operation the Russians are trying to conduct, and we need to keep an eye on this. As for the Sivers direction, nothing special, just regular activity in the vicinity of these trenches and the fortifications and the village of Verkhnye-Kamyanska. As for the northern Kupinsk direction, the Russians continue developing their positions. We can say that the Pishchane flower is blooming. Of course, this Pishchane flower is blooming not so fast as a Cheretina flower bloomed, or as Popasna flower bloomed, or any other flowers that we've seen since the beginning of the special military operation, but despite the fact the flower is blooming slowly, the flower is blooming, and the Russians are getting closer and closer and developing their positions wider and wider around this small village. Something big is going to happen in this direction as well, but not this month, maybe in October. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.